This week, we're going to begin the holiday of Chanukah and just a brief history of what happened. And I want to also pull one question and give several answers to a question about Chanukah. And hopefully that will enable us to glean some of the deeper insight on this wonderful holiday. So the story of Chanukah begins with the Greeks. And there's various Greeks. There's the Macedonians and Alexander, and you have the Ptolemies in Egypt. But the story really intensifies with the Assyrian or Seleucid Greeks of Asia Minor and Assyria. And they are led by someone by the name of Antiochus or Antiochus. There's Antiochus III, but really Antiochus IV. He's the one who really gets the ball rolling on the story of Chanukah. So he begins an assault on Judaism. This is presented, certainly in Jewish sources, as a religious conflict, as much as a territorial one, as much as a war on sovereignty. And Antiochus, he has bans on Torah study, public Torah study certainly, on observance of Shabbos or Jewish holidays, on kosher, on circumcision, on the laws of Nida. And he's a very brutal dictator, and he imposes very severe sanctions on Jewish life and Jewish practice. So essentially he starts corrupting the Jewish way of life. And this was a Greek ideal really in all their conquest. It wasn't just about territorial conquest. It was also about acculturation, about taking the Greek morals and the Greek ideologies and trying to infuse them into the conquered people. And that was called, of course, Hellenism. And the Jews eventually get fed up, and it begins in the city of Modi'in. And we know the story. There's Matisyahu, an old Kohen, and the Greeks try to get someone to worship the idolatry and offer a sacrifice of a pig. And Matisyahu pulls a dagger and starts attacking all the people, and the revolt begins. And there's a protracted 25-year war, and the Hasmoneans, as they became known, or the Maccabees, the family of Hashmonai, Matisyahu and his 5 sons, they lead a rebel guerrilla army against the mighty Greek Empire, and eventually, after many, many years of war, they managed to evict the invading forces out of the land of Israel, out of the land of Judah. That's the quick version of the story. And eventually, they get back to the temple. The temple was defiled and corrupted by the Greeks, and they restore it. And one of the temple sacrifices, of course, or services, is the menorah. And they only find 1 jug of undefiled oil, and they put it in there. It's only supposed to last for 1 day. It lasts for 8. By the time it lasts for 8 days, they're able to travel all the way to the northern of Israel to get more pure oil and to bring it back and to restore the ongoing lighting ceremony of the menorah every day. That's the story. Now, there's a prayer that we say during the week, during the 8 days of Chanukah, that describes the miracles that we are commemorating. I want to read to you, because this really is the official version of what happened, in a synopsized version. In the days of Matisyahu ben Yochanan the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, Hashmoniah, the Hasmonean, him and his sons, Kishamda Malchus Yavan Rashal Amcha Yisrael, when the evil, wicked Greek Empire stood up against your nation Israel. This is a prayer. And they tried to make us forget Torah and to make us abandon the laws and the mitzvos. And you God, in your overwhelming mercy, you stood up and supported them in the time of their despair. You fought their wars. You judged their judgings. You avenged their vengeance. And you gave over the mighty in the hands of the weak, the many in the hands of the few, the impure in the hands of the pure, the wicked in the hands of the righteous, and the wanton sinners in the hands of those that observe your Torah. And for you made a great name and a holy name in your world, and for your Jewish nation, you did a great salvation as this very day. And afterwards, your sons came to your temple, and they cleared it out, and they purified it, and they lit the candles in the courtyards of your holiness, and they established 8 days of Chanukah to thank you and to praise your holy name. That's the story. So if you actually break it down, you'll notice that there's really two parts of the miracle. There's the military aspect, the fact that a small ragtag rebel guerrilla army was able to actually achieve victory on the field of battle with a great empire with much more talented mercenaries and soldiers and battle tactics and generals, one of the world's greatest empires. So that's one miracle, the military miracle. And then, of course, there's the spiritual miracle, the fact that they came to the temple, and they restored the temple, and they lit the oil. The oil lasted for 8 days. By that time, they're able to travel and get more oil. And it's really interesting that, if we were to assess which one of those miracles is more significant, a 25-year war against a very mighty enemy that, against all odds, achieves success, that's a great miracle. Whereas the miracle of the oil, if you think about it, it wasn't that great of a miracle. It wasn't that necessary of a miracle, right? Because, they went for years without lighting the menorah. So the fact that they were able to light the menorah and it lasted, the oil supposed to last for 1 day, it lasted for 8. Okay, what would have happened if it only lasted for 1? So that it had 7 days without pure oil. You know what? The halacha actually states that if there is no pure oil, you should use impure oil. So wouldn't it have been the end of the world? And a week later, they were gone to the northern part of Israel and gathered the pure jugs of oil and brought it back, and everything would have been hunky-dory. Imagine if the military miracle had not worked out. You would have had slaughter of men, women, and children, towns. The whole country would have gone up in flames. The whole nation would have been destroyed. Of course, I think to us, we would surmise that the military miracle is not only more significant, but it's more important. Yet, if you look at what we celebrate, we eat the donuts and we eat the latkes and we light the menorah. It's all oil-oriented, and the actual mitzvah of the holiday, of the festival, is all oriented around the menorah and that miracle. And we just make the passing mention in this prayer of the military victory, which was so much more significant, or at least that's what we would assume. So the question is, why are we celebrating? Why are we memorializing? Why are we highlighting the comparatively more minor miracle and not the more major miracle? It's a really interesting question I think it's a good angle to approach some of the themes of Chanukah. So I want to give you 3 answers, and I think these answers can lay the groundwork for some of the themes that we're trying to hit, some of the notes we're trying to strike on this festival. So the first answer to this question is the question of the spiritual front versus the physical front. The Greeks were the first to launch a spiritual war. This whole war, it began not because of territorial disputes, not because of aggression, physical aggression of any sort. It was a broadside attack on the spiritual infrastructure of our nation. The Greeks had their spiritual ideas. They did not allow their conquered people to have their own spiritual ideas. They didn't live and let live like other dominant, controlling nations, like the Persians let us live and let live for the most part. The Romans, for the most part, let us live and let live. In America, we could practice religion freely. They didn't believe that. They were the first ones to say, not only are we going to subject you physically, we're going to force you to be a part of our empire and be under our dominion. We're going to be your overlords. We're also going to tell you how to think and how to behave and how to worship. And therefore, really, if we think about the war, it was, and today, like in this modern state of Israel, the Hasmoneans are put on a pedestal. And they were the ones who say, we're going to fight back. And there, it's interesting, the Olympics, the Israeli Olympic team is called the Maccabees, or the Maccabee Games, which is so ironic because the Greeks were the ones who introduced the idea of Olympics to the world to focus on the beautiful human body. And the Maccabees were the ones who came to the world, who came in and said, no, we're talking about the Jewish ideal of looking at the soul and looking at the body, so to speak, as an impediment to the soul's ascension and the soul's greatness. And ironically, the Maccabee Games are the ones where we act as Greeks in a certain sense, which is really ironic. But what were the Maccabees trying to do? They were trying to restore the spiritual stability and security of the nation. And therefore, we have to look at this war as really being a military campaign that is underpinned by a spiritual motivation. And therefore, that when we are celebrating the victory, yes, there is the physical military victory. And that's very important, and we acknowledge that. But we cannot forget that the real core of the conflict was about the oil, so to speak, or about the spiritual aspect of it. And I think for us today, we're not used to thinking about our life and our conflict in spiritual terms. We know we have challenges, and we have, of course, the challenge to live, to exist in this world and to make a living and to get ahead in life. And we're not used to thinking about the spiritual nature of our daily struggle. And I think one of the themes that we're trying to remember on Chanukah is to remember that our antecedents, the Hasmoneans, they were really motivated by the oil. They were motivated by the fact that the temple was defiled, and that is what spurred their military campaign. It wasn't that, they really they were looking for an excuse to pick fights with a great empire. No, they were motivated by spiritual motivations that was guiding them, and that is what engendered the physical war. And I think for us, it's a very powerful emotion and thought to consider during the week of Chanukah, the fact that we too were really, the military war with the Greeks is over, but there still is a war ongoing. This is the war of our life. It's the spiritual war. It's the war that with Greek culture that still exists, and we could still partake, so to speak, in the war, and therefore we're highlighting the fact that the spiritual war and the spiritual triumph that our ancestors had, that should still inspire us and guide us today. I think that's one answer. There's another answer as to why we are highlighting and focusing so much on the spiritual victory and not so much on the physical military one. And that is the fact that we want to remember that God loves us. There's many times in the Torah where the Almighty pledges and promises that the Jewish people will be an eternal nation. Abraham already is told, your kids, they're going to have the land of Israel, and they're going to be the ones to fulfill Tikkun Olam. And the most improbable historical fact is the fact that we existed and we survived, and we're still standing as a nation despite everything that has transpired to us. God pledged will forever exist, will be the eternal nation. So it's almost as if God had no choice but to save us militarily. He already promised that we'll survive as a nation. And God keeps his word. And it's almost as if the miracle of the military aspect of the war, that was mandatory. He has to keep his word. He has to keep his pledge. That doesn't necessarily show that he loves us. However, like we said, the miracle of the oil, they could have done with impure oil. Or they could have waited 7 days and gotten more pure oil from the north. God wasn't bound to make another miracle. And therefore, that miracle shows that God is not just keeping his promise. It's not just a business relationship where you're bound contractually to keep the Jewish people alive. God loves us as a parent. and that God did something extra, right? It was a bonus for us just because he loves us. And that's an important thing to remember. I heard a parable to explain this. So you have a babysitter. And the worst thing that can happen to the baby, well, maybe not the worst thing, but a unfortunate thing that would happen to babysitter is if the baby makes a dirty diaper, right? You got to clean it, right? That's the tax the babysitters have to pay. So what happens? You have a babysitter that is watching charged with watching the baby makes a dirty diaper. Okay, get the wipes, clean them up, right? Okay. That's one image. And then you have the mother who changes her own child's dirty diaper. Or the father. In my case, the mother. I made a deal with my wife. I say, okay, I'll do throw up. You'll do dirty diapers. So whenever the child vomits, any one of our children, it's always that's my responsibility.
Well, you got the better end because there's more dirty diapers than vomiting.
That's true. But okay, so we have a deal. Everyone's happy with the deal. So what happens when a parent is changing their own child's dirty diaper? They change the diaper, but then, of course, they scoop up the baby and give the child a kiss. That's what parents do. The babysitter, both of them have to change the dirty diaper. Both of them have to. The babysitter, that's their job. But there's no emotional love that the babysitter has with the child. The parent, on the other hand, yes, they too have a responsibility. They have to change the dirty diaper. But they don't. It's not just a responsibility that's a toll, it's a burden on them. It's something they love to do. And they add the extra kiss and the extra show of affection for the child because they love the child. Indeed, God had to, so to speak. He pledged, he made a promise to save us militarily. The Greeks want to destroy us as a nation. We have to win. It's a miracle. A miracle has to happen. But you know what does not have to happen? The miracle of the oil. That demonstrates his love for us. And a third answer, and that is what's the benefit of acknowledging miracles to begin with? What's the whole reason why we have the celebration of Chanukah is to deepen and to develop and to foster and to nourish and to sustain our bond with God. That's the whole purpose of acknowledging the miracles to begin with. We appreciate and we offer gratitude to him, and that strengthens our relationship with him. And I would say, if you have a relationship with anyone, certainly a spouse, a way to foster and deepen and strengthen the relationship is by acknowledging and appreciating and showing gratitude to them. But there's two kinds of gratitude. When we have the holiday season, right? Everyone's giving gifts, either Chanukah gifts or Xmas gifts, whatever it is. You got to give thank you, right? But there's a lot of times where you have to acknowledge the goodness done to you by others. It's not only when there's really big gifts, it's also when there's really small gifts. I think we're being told here an important lesson. What is the most effective tool to deepen a relationship via gratitude? It's by learning to focus on the little things. When someone gives you something really big, God gives us military victory over the mighty Greeks. And we're so thankful, but we're not really thankful to God per se. We're thankful for the fact that we actually won. The gift itself, so to speak, is the focus. And that is not as apt to connect us with the giver of the gift, i.e. God. Whereas when we train ourselves to give thanks on the small things, which are not so significant, we could have survived very well without the oil, but we're training ourselves to thank God, to thank the giver of the gift. Even on the small things, that actually bonds the recipient of the gift with the giver of the gift. Where the person is not, or the individual, the entity, or the nation, is not focused on the actual gift itself, but on the giver of the gift, because the gift is not so significant, that actually is more likely to foster the real change in the relationship. I think it's a really powerful lesson. If your spouse buys you a BMW, you're so happy for the BMW. You're so thankful because of the gift. But you're not necessarily your happiness and joy and your emotion is not linked to the person, it's linked to the item, to the thing that you're getting. Whereas if you're thankful that your spouse takes out the garbage, which is something very small, you're not so happy that the garbage is outside. You're just happy of the gesture that someone did for you. Or made your bed or whatever, something really small. That appreciation on the little things, that is actually important to focus on even more, or at least to a certain degree to not neglect that, because that is really what binds you two together. And, it's interesting. We had a episode in the Parsha a few weeks ago with Rachel. And Rachel is barren for many years. And her sister Leah is having kids, popping out the kids, right? She has 7 children before Rachel has even 1. And Rachel's so miserable, she walks over to her husband, Jacob, and she tells him, give me kids or else I'm going to die. She's so miserable. She's so sad. She feels empty. And then finally she has a child, Joseph. And the Torah tells us, why did she name him Joseph? And gives us 2 reasons. First reason why is the word Yosef means to add. She's already looking at the next baby. Give me another one. Yosef, give me another. Add, increase for me another child. That's one reason. But the first reason brought down in the verse is that Rachel says, Asaf Hashem es charpasi. The word Yosef is connected to Asaf, to gather. God gathered in my shame. She was shamed earlier, and now she is not ashamed. What was she ashamed about? So we would say she was ashamed of the fact that she didn't have any children. She went to the park alone. All right, she didn't have a stroller to push. There's a lot of she had shame. But Rashi tells us something very surprising. Rashi says that she had shame. Why? Because every time Jacob walked into the house and there was no more figs left, there was no more cookies left, there was no one to blame. Because Rachel was the only one who possibly could have eaten them all. And now, this is literally what Rashi says. Now, it used to be that when there was no figs left, who ate the figs? It must have been you. Now she could tell him, I don't have any shame anymore. You know who ate the figs? Your son, Yosef. Who broke the dish? Who broke the glass? Earlier, it was just Rachel. Now it's your kid. That's what Rashi says. And I think it's really surprising teaching. Like, she's so miserable. She doesn't have any children. I'm going to die if I don't have a child. Now you finally have a child. What are we going to celebrate? Oh, I have a scapegoat. You finally have someone to pin the blame on. Seems like a really strange thing. What's the lesson here? The lesson is that of course Rachel was appreciative of the big thing that she had a child. And now she has something to live for. Previously she said, I have nothing to live for. Of course she was appreciative of that. But she also is teaching us a lesson here to not ignore the most minor of things. What's the most minor of things that you could possibly conjure? What's the least significant benefit of having a child? Is the fact that you have a scapegoat. That's the least significant thing. Now, when the cookie jar is empty, there's someone to blame, not just her. It's the smallest thing. And Rachel's teaching us a lesson here, is that it's important for us to not just look at the big things. Of course, we have to acknowledge that, but to make a big deal about the little things, because we make a big deal about the little things, that actually is more apt to bind you to the giver of the gift, in this case, to God. She's so appreciative, even of the little things, and that strengthens her relationship with her creator and the benefactor. So again, 3 answers as to why we are celebrating and making a big deal of the small things, either because it's trying to remind us of the spiritual component of the war, or it's trying to show us that God loves us. God had to save us militarily. He didn't need to give us the other gift. That just shows his love. Or when we focus on the small things in life, that is more likely to bind us and to connect us with our benefactor, with, of course, in this instance is God, but even in our relationships, make a big deal of the little things, and that will ensure that our relationships will be sustained and will be strengthened, will be secure, and will deepen and develop as they ought to be.